She almost didn't notice it. That's the thing about secrets. They don't announce themselves. They sit quiet in plain sight, patient as stones, waiting for the exact wrong moment to surface. Kate was in the small antechamber off the main drawing room at Sandringham, the one that smelled of old wood and dried flowers, and something underneath both that she'd never been able to name. She was early, 20 minutes early, which William had warned her about once. "You can't be early here, darling. Early is almost as bad as late. It makes people feel watched." She'd smiled and nodded and continued being early to everything, because some habits are just who you are. She wasn't snooping. She needed to be clear about that, at least to herself, because the way it unfolded would look like snooping. It would look deliberate. It wasn't. She'd come in looking for a ribbon, specifically a blue ribbon that George had been trailing around the house since breakfast and had apparently abandoned somewhere in this wing, and Nanny had asked and Kate had said yes. "I'll find it because that's what she does. She solves the small problems, the ribbon problems, while the large ones hover overhead like weather." The bureau drawer was slightly open, just an inch. Just enough that the light from the window caught something inside. A glint. A specific kind of glint. The way old metal catches light differently than new metal. Warmer, heavier somehow. Kate stood there for 2 full seconds. She wasn't going to open it. Then she opened it. The necklace lay coiled on a square of black velvet like something that had been put there carefully, intentionally. The way you place a thing you're not ready to look at, but can't bring yourself to put away entirely. It was old. Not antique old in the decorative sense. Old in the way that means it has moved through many hands, that it carries the warmth of them. A gold chain, fine but not delicate, and at its center a pendant. A small oval locket, engraved on the face with a pattern of intertwined ivy that had been worn smooth on one side, where a thumb had rubbed it, many times, over many years. Kate didn't touch it. She stood with the drawer open and looked at it, and something in the back of her mind, that quiet, always cataloging part of her that William called her archivist brain, started running. She knew this necklace. Not from having seen it before, from having seen its absence. In every photograph, every formal portrait, every engagement of Camilla's she had attended in the past 11 years, there was a gap in the woman's jewelry, a specific kind of gap, the kind that suggests a habit interrupted. Camilla wore pearls, occasionally diamonds, sometimes her sapphire brooch. But at her throat, where some women wear their most personal pieces, she wore nothing. The absence was so consistent it had become invisible. Until now, it had an explanation in the shape of this locket. Kate closed the drawer, stood very still in the room that smelled of old wood and dried flowers. The ribbon, she remembered. She was looking for a ribbon. She found it behind a chair leg, crumpled and slightly damp. George had clearly been using it to drag something through a puddle. And she picked it up and stood in the doorway and understood. Yeah, with the particular clarity that early mornings and old houses sometimes produce, that she was going to find out what was in that locket. Not today. Not by opening a drawer she hadn't been invited to open. But eventually, the way you eventually find out everything in a family like this. Sideways, through a sentence someone doesn't finish. Through the way a room changes temperature when a certain name comes up. Through the architecture of all the things that are never directly said. She walked back down the corridor holding the damp ribbon. William looked up from his coffee when she came in. "Find it?" "Yes," she said. She sat down and poured herself tea and did not say, "I found something else." Because here was the thing about this family. The thing it had taken her years to learn. The thing nobody tells you when you marry into it. You don't bring things into the light. You wait for the light to come to them. You learn to sit with the not knowing. You learn to let the house keep its secrets a little longer, because some secrets have been kept so long they've become structural, and you don't pull load-bearing walls. She drank her tea. smiled when George came barreling in demanding his ribbon back, and thought about a locket with ivy on it, worn smooth on one side, in a drawer nobody was supposed to open. Something had been placed there carefully. Something had been kept. The question was, by whom? And for whom? And why, after all this time, it was still there. It was Margaret, Lady Margaret Hollis, 83 years old, sharp as a letter opener, deaf in one ear and choosing to be deaf in the other whenever convenient, who told her, not on purpose. Kate had learned that about the older women in this world. They don't give you things directly. They set them on the table and then look the other way, and if you're paying attention, you pick them up. They were in the garden at Highgrove, the kind of English spring afternoon that can't decide between rain and sunshine, and so commits to both, the light going gold and gray in turns. Margaret had been installed in a wicker chair with a lap blanket she was aggressively ignoring the necessity of, and Kate had sat beside her with the excuse of keeping her company and the real reason of knowing, somehow, that Margaret would eventually say the thing. Old women who've watched enough decades roll past acquire a kind of pressurized quality. Secrets build up in them, and they let things slip not from carelessness, but because the weight of long keeping becomes its own burden, and sometimes you set a thing down simply because your arms are tired. "She wore it every day, you know," Margaret said, not looking at Kate, looking at the garden. Kate said nothing. The archivist brain went very still. Before everything went sideways the first time, when she was still, Margaret paused, made a small sound that was not quite a word. When she was still hoping. The story came out in pieces, the way these stories always do, not in sequence, not with transitions, but in fragments that Kate had to arrange herself into something coherent, like finding all the pieces of a letter that had been torn up and scattered across different rooms of a house. The locket had been a gift, not from Charles. But that was the first surprising thing, the thing that made Kate recalibrate everything she'd been quietly theorizing. Not from Charles, from Camilla's mother. Rosalind Shand had given it to her daughter on the morning of what should have been, what Camilla had believed at 24 with the particular iron certainty of the very young. The beginning of everything. Not a wedding, not an engagement. Something smaller and larger than either. The morning Camilla had decided she was going to tell him. Going to say the actual words, not in the language they'd developed of looks and half-sentences and proximity, but out loud, direct, like a woman who knew her own mind. She had gotten dressed, put the necklace on, and her mother had come into the room and seen her daughter's face. Whatever was on that face. At 24 years old and about to walk into the thing she wanted most, and had said nothing. Just reached out and pressed the locket once with her thumb against Camilla's collarbone. That gesture. That was all. "I see you. Go." "She didn't go," Margaret said, still looking at the garden. A bird moved in the hedge. Neither of them watched it. "She got as far as the gate." A pause. "Saw his car. Knew there was someone with him. Knew the way you know things when you're young and your instincts are still uncomplicated by self-deception." Another pause. Longer. "She went home." Kate was quiet. "She never told him she'd meant to," Margaret said. "And he never... well..." The old woman's mouth did something complicated. "He was not, in those years, particularly good at noticing the things that weren't said to him." The afternoon light went gray again. The lap blanket remained ignored. "She wore the necklace every day for 2 years after that. Then she stopped." Margaret finally looked at Kate directly, which was unusual for her. She was a woman who spoke mostly to the middle distance. "I've always thought that's when she made a different kind of peace with things, when the necklace went away." "But she kept it," Kate said. "She kept it," Margaret agreed. She said it the way you confirm something that has its own obvious answer, a thing that needs no elaboration because the keeping of a thing says everything the keeping of a thing can say. Kate drove back to Kensington in the particular silence that descends when your understanding of someone has been restructured. That this was the thing about Camilla, the real thing, not the tabloid shorthand, not the easy narrative, that Kate had been slowly, carefully assembling over 11 years of proximity. She had walked into this family with her own preconceptions intact. She'd be lying to say otherwise. She'd been 27, in love, slightly terrified, and carrying a decade's worth of the same cultural inheritance everyone carried about what Camilla was, and what she'd done, and what she represented. It had taken years to replace that picture with an actual person. The actual person was complicated, warm in ways that surprised you, guarded in ways that made sense once you understood their origin, funny, genuinely, surprisingly funny, in the dry way that requires real intelligence. A woman who had loved something enormous and been denied it, and denied herself it, and come back to it by a road so long and strange and costly that the woman at the end of it bore only partial resemblance to the girl at the beginning. A woman who had a locket in a drawer that she could not throw away and could not wear. Kate turned that over in her mind, the whole drive home. Could not throw away. Could not wear. She thought about her own things. The particular objects she'd carried through her life that functioned less as objects and more as markers. I was here. This mattered. This cost me something. The worn spine of a book she'd read during her worst university year. A photograph she kept turned face down in a box, because looking at it still landed somewhere tender and she'd never been ready to stop keeping it. The things you can't discard, because discarding them would mean the moment they came from didn't happen, didn't count, didn't hurt in a way that shaped you. Some things you keep not because you're stuck. You keep them because you're honest. She didn't say anything to William about Margaret's garden conversation. She knew how it would land, not badly, not unkindly, but it would become a thing, something to be managed, something that would travel through the quiet network of family awareness and reach Camilla in some altered form, stripped of the texture that made it tender, and become instead an event. Kate didn't want it to become an event. She wanted it to stay what it was, a woman in a garden, setting something down because her arms were tired. She sat in the bath that night while the kids' noise wound down through the walls of the apartment into the particular quiet of children finally asleep, and she thought about Rosalind Shand pressing a locket against her daughter's collarbone without a word. I see you. Go. And her daughter getting as far as the gate, and coming home, and wearing the necklace every day for 2 years. And then the day she stopped. There is a version of every life that didn't happen. The locket is where Camilla keeps hers. Somewhere between keeping and wearing is the whole story. It happened 3 weeks later, and it happened the way the important things happen. Not with ceremony, not with planning, not at the moment you've been quietly bracing for, but sideways, on a Tuesday, when you're standing in a kitchen waiting for the kettle. Clarence's house. In a small working lunch that had run long in the way these things always ran long. Charles had been pulled into a call. William had gone with him. Something about an agricultural trust, the specifics of which Kate had only half absorbed. Staff had cleared and disappeared with the practiced invisibility of people who've spent their careers being furniture. Kate and Camilla were alone in the kitchen. This had happened before. More times than people might expect, actually. The two of them left in the residue of a gathering, making tea, talking about the children's schools or a garden project or nothing in particular. They had, over the years, quietly built something that functioned less like affection and more like respect, and less like respect and more like the mutual understanding of two women who have both loved the same family from the inside and understood what that costs. Not friends, not friends. Something that didn't have a clean word yet. The kettle was doing its preparatory rumble. Kate was looking at the window, the gray March garden beyond it. And Camilla said, conversationally, carefully in the tone of someone setting something on a table, "I've been thinking about moving some things around. In the rooms at Sandringham." Kate turned. Camilla was watching the kettle. Her expression was what it always was. Composed, slightly amused at itself for being composed, the face of a woman who learned to manage her surface very young and has made a kind of peace with the fact that the surface is now permanent. Some of the bureau drawers," Camilla added, still watching the kettle. "Things accumulate." The kitchen was very quiet. Kate understood. She was being told that Camilla knew she'd opened the drawer. She was being told this quietly, without accusation, in the language of implication that this family conducted its most significant communications in. She said, "I was looking for George's ribbon." "Of course you were," Camilla said, not unkindly. The kettle reached its boil and clicked off, and neither of them moved to it immediately. "It was my mother's," Camilla said, still not looking at her. "Well, mine, eventually. She gave it to me." A pause. "She died before she could take it back, which I think she might have done, some years." The almost smile on the word "some years" carried the entire history of those years without naming one of them. "It's beautiful," Kate said. It was the only honest, neutral thing she had. "It's very old," Camilla said, which was agreement. She picked up the kettle and poured, and the sound of water filled the space where all the unsaid things were hovering. "I was going to throw it away," Camilla said. "Once. I had it in my hand over the bin." She set the kettle down, pushed a cup toward Kate. "I couldn't do it." "No," Kate said. "Ridiculous at this point, to still have it." "No," Kate said again. Camilla looked at her then, properly, directly, the way she didn't often. Camilla's direct looks were reserved for things she meant to have heard. Kate didn't look away. And what passed between them in that look was not words, and not warmth exactly, and not the recognizing of oneself in another that gets called understanding in the easy telling. It was something more specific and less comfortable than any of those things. It was the acknowledgement, both of them making it simultaneously across all the years and all the weight of what those years contained, that the things we cannot throw away are not weaknesses. They are the evidence of having lived seriously, of having wanted things with real wanting, of having been shaped by something, the locket in the drawer, the moment at the gate, the 2 years of wearing it after, the day she stopped. None of it erased, none of it denied, just kept, the way you keep what's true about yourself even when the truth is inconvenient, even when it complicates the official story, even when the official story has been running for decades and has its own momentum. This is where I've been. This is what it cost. I'm still here. They drank their tea. Charles and William came back, talking over each other about something to do with soil regeneration rates, and the kitchen filled up again with the ordinary noise of a family, and Camilla passed biscuits and made a dry remark that made William laugh, and the moment folded back into the afternoon like it had never surfaced. But Kate held it the whole drive home, and later, when she was sitting on the edge of Louis's bed after the nighttime story, while he did the thing toddlers do of pretending to be almost asleep when they're actually deeply awake and plotting something, she held it then too. She thought about what it means to keep a thing. She thought about Camilla at 24, dressed and ready, making it as far as the gate. The life that branched from that gate, not the one she walked back into, but the one she didn't walk toward. The ghost life. The not-taken road that every person carries inside them in some form. The version of yourself you had to leave behind to become the self you are. She thought about Rosalind Shand's thumb against the locket. "I see you. Go." And her daughter, who went part way to the gate and came home and kept the thing anyway. This was the stunning discovery, though it didn't look like one from the outside. It looked like a woman opening a drawer by accident. It looked like garden conversation on a gray afternoon. It looked like two women drinking tea in a kitchen while a kettle cooled. But what Kate had discovered was not a secret in the tabloid sense, not something to be exposed or explained or made into a story about who Camilla was or wasn't, who she'd been or shouldn't have been. What Kate had discovered was a person. The actual person underneath all the accumulated weight of public narrative. The villain, the interloper, the woman who'd been written as a single note for 20 years. Underneath all of it, a 24-year-old girl who'd dressed carefully and made it to the gate. A middle-aged woman who kept something she couldn't wear. An old woman now who had made peace of a hard kind with a life that had been hard and real and hers. Not simple, not clean, not a story with a clear moral. Just a woman keeping a locket in a drawer. The ivy worn smooth on one side where a thumb had been, many times. On over many years. Kate didn't tell William. She didn't tell anyone. Some things you keep not because they're secret. You keep them because they belong to someone else. And the most decent thing you can do with another person's truth, once they've set it on the table and looked the other way and let you see it, is hold it quietly and not make it yours, and let them keep the dignity of having carried it. She thought about it one more time, weeks later, at a formal dinner. The kind that requires everything and forgives nothing, all chandelier light and protocol and careful seating arrangements. Camilla was across the table, pearls at her throat. The particular composed expression she wore for these occasions, managing the surface, the way she always managed the surface. But Kate knew now what the surface was covering. Not scandal, not shame. A whole life. An ivy locket in a drawer. A mother's thumb pressed once without a word. A gate that a girl stood at for a moment. 24 years old and hoping, before she turned and went home and kept going and became, in spite of everything and because of everything, exactly who she is. Kate lifted her glass. And across the table for just a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice, Camilla's eyes found hers. Neither of them smiled. They didn't need to.